My name is Jaša and I'll be today's host of ECON I News. Today we'll be talking about economic experimentation. The topics will include the increasing inequalities in the world, the intensifying climate crisis, and the many questions of current economic models and what role can alternative economic approaches play in this fight against inequalities and climate crisis. The main questions of today's discussion are going to be about how drastic the measures can be to reduce poverty and what extent should the environmental protection be considered in economy. And we'll be discussing those questions with our guest speakers, and I'm very excited for everyone who will be able to join us. So the main questions, as mentioned, are going to be about poverty. The United Nations has estimated that approximately 8.6% of the world population was living in extreme poverty in 2019. And although this has been decreasing, the statistics are showing that this will not be able to go further down than 6%. And as the Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030, it is a major question of how we can reach that if the current economic models are not showing that that is possible. Currently, the main approaches to reduce poverty are focused around the concept of growth. The growth, which is usually seen through the gross domestic product of a country, has been something that has developed countries, and in that regard has been lowering the poverty statistics in the world. But as mentioned, there is a significant doubt that this kind of approaches can go further than where they've come so far, and that's why we are questioning what other approaches there should be. And in that way, we're going to go to our first guest speakers, who will talk about the extent of these measures to reduce poverty.
According to United Nations data, approximately 8.6% of the world population was living in extreme poverty in 2019. There has been a rapid, constant decrease in recent decades. Calculations are showing that it will not be able to decrease further than 6% though. Therefore, reaching this SDG target to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030 seems very difficult to us.
So, reducing the numbers of people in poverty is an action that must be taken immediately. That's why we recognize the concept of universal basic income. So, what is universal basic income? It's basically a fixed amount at a level sufficient for subsistence given by the state to all its citizens, regardless of income or work status. We have the statistics that proved that it's somewhat efficient and helpful to society, but there are also backlashes that we must consider.
Which is why we need to be careful and absolutely sure about the measures we take. One important thing to take into account is fiscal policy. A state can either gain money by tax collection or by acquiring debt. And when we do some statistical research, at a certain point, more taxes actually produce more poverty. So we have to clearly define the lines in which we take action to start eradicating poverty.
And even though these risks are real and the solution can actually become a catastrophe, we're still willing to take this drastic measure because people who are in need right now, and they require immediate help.
And thank you for coming back. That was our first guest speakers. Now we will focus a little bit more on the environmental aspect. Just like poverty, environmental protection and climate crisis is one of the major debates of modern times. And this topic is, besides focusing on poverty, very, very much focusing also on the environment and how these two issues can be fixed together without them going against each other. The questions of how environment should be considered in economic approaches has been going for quite some time, and the problem of current approaches, including the concept of growth, are that They are very much focused on short-term successes, which usually do not include looking out for the environment. And that's why the second guest speakers are going to be talking about the question of environmental protection and to what extent it should be considered in the economy. And let's kick it off.
Well, in my beliefs, this is a really intricate question that requires very flexible answers, and we cannot put a strict border to it. Is the best thing for economy to be considered to the fullest in the environmental protection? It is, but can we actually do it? We cannot, and in my belief, not every country can observe the same measures. We should consider the economy in all of this environmental policy because the pollution is directly going and affecting our health, the human health, and this rises the costs of the healthcare spending and reduces the labor supply. And also pollution affects natural resources and maybe the natural environment that may be used as a lot of industries use it as inputs available for production. At the same time, if we see the pros of the cons of this, a lot of European industry kind of suffer from EU restriction for environmental protection because they think it may hamper their growth or it will undermine their international competitiveness. And they may even think to move their market outside the European Union. At the same time, if we think about the social impact of all of this, we cannot actually require to someone in the third world country to put environmental protection before their incomes because everyone regarding their economic status has different priorities.
Yes, I would agree with all of that. I think definitely it's got to be a flexible kind of policy decision. So I guess we've just got to think about how we can most incorporate this policy in the most clever way to ensure that these measures do work and that we can limit any kind of negative repercussions which may come from focusing on environmental growth as opposed to economic growth. So I guess possibly ones who want to think about definitely the link between environmental growth to standard of living, because we'll see with environmental growth, if you have a more sustainable industries, more green spaces, you're going to have a sort of less pollution, a higher standard of living. So I think that is how I guess developing countries can kind of make this appealing to their citizens. And then obviously there's actually a big link between environmental growth and economic growth, and with economic growth you see a higher standard of living as well. So if we can encourage, I suppose, developing countries to realize this, I guess the biggest problem for making them realize it is when we look at these short-term problems. Possibly in the short term it's going to be more expensive. So I guess this is where we got to think about the kind of clever policies, possibly ones looking at increasing efficiencies, wasting less water, because things like that are going to be less expensive in the short term and the long term. So I guess it's finding the best policies would work for the individual countries. And yeah, I think that's me.
So yeah, I'd just like to sum up our discussion and bring the points that we both agreed on, which are basically the points that developing countries should pursue growth-driven economies, and that economical systems and structures, and that one of the underprivileges of growth-driven economies, and maybe the most important one, is pollution and environmental damages caused by growth-driven economies, right?
Yeah.
Would you like to add something to this?
I would like to add that I think the question that we discussed the most was or the question that I tried to that I tried to incorporate more heavily into our debate was the question of how of the problems that I think are attached to actually implement that to practically implementing anything other than growth-driven economics, because in the end, I think restricting the natural urge of mankind to grow whatever they are doing and to further whatever they are doing, I think restricting that urge is ever only possible with a small number of people making arbitrary decisions for a large number of people that don't really, or that aren't at all able to incorporate the intentions and the individual will of all these people into their decision making. So I think this is one of the things why we kind of talked about the difficulties that are attached to deviating from growth-based economics when you actually think about how to practically implement anything else. Yeah.
For the second guest speakers, and I hope that you learned something through this rather short segments on these two very important aspects of our topic. I hope that you will also be going further into research about these topics and learn something maybe even more personally important to you regarding the eradication of poverty and fixing of the climate crisis when it comes to the economical approaches that we have. We will also be definitely updating you on our discussions throughout the Milano session, and this were the news on Econ I for today.